There are some things you don't figure out until after they've already happened to you. The moment you understand why the floor felt cold that morning, or why the kitchen smelled like burnt coffee and something final. It comes later, usually at 3 in the morning, when the city is quiet enough for the truth to find you. Tilda Voss learned that lesson at 26, sitting on a concrete step outside her uncle's house in Hamilton, with $47 in her jacket pocket. And nowhere to go. She hadn't been thrown out. That would have implied a fight. What her uncle Desmond had done was quieter than that. He'd slid a single piece of paper across the kitchen table while she was eating cereal. A letter from a lawyer, names she didn't recognize, a figure with too many digits, and said, "Your father's debt doesn't disappear just because he did. Someone has to settle it." He didn't look at her when he said it. He looked at the wall. She'd grown up in that house after her parents left. Not left together, not dramatically. Her mother first, when Tilda was 9, into a car with a man named Raymond who drove a truck and didn't have room for a child. Her father 2 years later, slower, more quiet, into a bottle and then into nothing. Desmond and his wife Patrice had taken her in because someone had to, and they'd made sure she understood the terms of that arrangement every single day for 17 years. She was good with numbers. That was the one thing Tilda had going for her. She could look at a column of figures and feel them settle into sense, the way other people felt a tune click into key. She'd put herself through 2 years of bookkeeping school working double shifts at a 24-hour diner on Barton Street. She knew what things cost. She knew how to count. The number on the lawyer's letter was $240,000. She sat on the step for a long time. A cat walked by and didn't look at her. The streetlight at the corner had been flickering for 3 weeks. She knew because she'd watched it every night from her bedroom window, the one room in the house she'd never been allowed to paint. The call came the next morning. She didn't recognize the number. Hamilton area code, but the voice on the other end was careful and precise in a way that made her stomach tighten. "Ms. Voss, not a question. My employer would like to meet with you regarding your late father's obligations. My father's dead. Yes, the debt is not." There was a silence in which she understood something had already been decided without her. She went because she didn't see another option. She went the way you go to a dentist when the pain gets bad enough. Not because you want to, but because avoiding it has stopped being bearable. She took the bus to a building on the waterfront she'd never noticed before. Glass and steel, the kind of place that doesn't have a sign outside because it doesn't need one. The man at the front desk gave her a badge without asking her name. That told her something. She was taken up to the 14th floor and left in a room with 2 chairs, a table, a window, that looked out over the harbor, and no clock. She'd worked enough bad shifts to know that removing the clock was deliberate. She counted her heartbeats instead. Got to 240 before the door opened. The man who came in wasn't what she expected, though she hadn't been sure what she expected. He was somewhere past 40, which surprised her. Not old exactly, but past the age where most people still carried their edges this sharply. He had the kind of face that had been handsome once and was now something more interesting. A jaw that had been broken and reset, a scar along the left side of his neck that disappeared into his collar, dark eyes that moved the way a person moves when they've been in rooms where movement meant something. He sat down across from her and put a folder on the table between them. He didn't open it. "Tilda Voss," he said. His name, she would learn, was Cale Draven. He didn't offer it then. He just looked at her like he was checking arithmetic. "You already know who I am," she said. "I know who your father was." He paused. "He came to me 3 years ago, looking for operating capital. I lent it. He spent most of it on things that weren't his business to spend it on, and then he had a heart attack before I could collect." She kept her hands flat on her table, the way she did at work when a column wasn't adding up, and she needed to stay level. "So what does that have to do with me?" "Legally, nothing. You didn't sign anything." He said it plainly, without softening it, which she appreciated despite herself. "Your uncle, however, did. He co-signed as guarantor in 2021, which means the debt is his. She already knew this. She'd read the letter 3 times. But Desmond Voss, Cale Draven continued, doesn't have $240,000. What he has is you. She heard herself say very quietly, excuse me, he called my people last week. He made a proposal. He still hadn't opened the folder. He suggested that you could work off the debt in my organization, specifically in our accounts division, because apparently someone told him you have a gift with numbers. A pause. He also suggested a longer-term arrangement that I declined, for the record. She felt the floor shift slightly beneath her. Not literally, just the way it does when you find out how little someone thought of you. She had known, of course. She had always known, in the way you know things you've never let yourself look at directly. She'd been useful to Desmond and Patrice. Not loved. Useful. And when she stopped being useful enough, she became currency. You said you declined the longer-term arrangement, yes. It's not how I run things. He finally opened the folder. A single sheet. What I'm proposing is simpler. You work. Real work. Reconciling accounts, tracking ledgers, overseeing financial reporting for 3 of my operations. 12 months. At the end of 12 months, the debt is cleared, and you walk out with a reference and a severance that would set you up comfortably. She looked at the sheet. The numbers were clean. The terms were specific. There was no language she couldn't pass. What kind of operations, she said. The kind your uncle knows better than to ask about. She sat with that. And if I say no, then you leave. I pursue the debt through Desmond directly, which will take longer and be more unpleasant for him, and you go back to Hamilton with your $47. He said it the way someone states a mathematical fact, not cruel, just exact. She looked up at him. How do you know about the $47? For the first time, something moved in his expression. Not quite a smile, more like the ghost of one that had died a long time ago. Because I know what it costs to run away and how much people leave with when they do it in a hurry. She took the pen he pushed across the table, and she signed. She had expected something out of a movie. Dark hallways, men with guns visible at all times, secret rooms she'd have to pretend not to notice. What she got was an office on the 12th floor of the same building, a desk with 3 monitors, a filing system that was, she discovered on the first morning, an absolute disaster. Someone had been tracking 3 separate revenue streams using 2 different currencies, one of which wasn't officially acknowledged, across a spreadsheet system that had clearly been built by someone who understood neither spreadsheets nor systems. There were columns named things like MISC and other, and memorably, don't touch. There were formulas that circled back on themselves like a dog chasing its tail. There was an entire tab simply labeled Q3 that appeared to contain someone's grocery list. Tilda sat back in her chair and looked at it for a very long time. Then she made herself a coffee, found a notepad in the desk drawer, and started from the beginning. She worked in that office for the first 3 weeks without seeing Cale Draven at all. She got her instructions from a man named Orin, who was dry and efficient, and brought her a second coffee every morning at 10 without being asked, which she appreciated. She ate lunch at her desk. She took the bus home to the apartment they'd arranged for her, furnished, clean, slightly impersonal, like a hotel room that had forgotten it was a hotel room. And she slept and she came back. She was good at compartmentalizing. She'd learned it young. You don't survive 17 years in a house where you're tolerated rather than wanted without building good walls. What she didn't expect was to find that the work itself was interesting. Not because of what it was. She knew what it was. She wasn't naive, but because the problem was real. 3 operations running at different rhythms, different risk profiles, different exposure. Whoever had set this up before her hadn't been thinking about the whole picture. They'd been thinking about each piece in isolation, which meant every time one piece moved, the others lurched sideways, trying to compensate. She started building a model, not because she'd been asked to, but because not building it felt like leaving a puzzle half-finished on the floor. Orin found her at 7 in the evening on a Thursday, still at her desk, with 3 windows open, and a hand-drawn chart taped to the wall beside her monitor. He looked at the chart for a moment. Draven wants to see you. Cale Draven's office was on the 14th floor. Different from the meeting room, This one had bookshelves with actual books on them, a window facing west, a desk that was covered in papers that were clearly organized in a way only he understood. He was standing when she came in, looking at something on his own monitor. He glanced at her, then at the folder she was holding. "Orin said you've been in the office every night this week. The previous system was inefficient." She put the folder on his desk. "I rebuilt the model. It'll take another 2 weeks to fully migrate, but once it's done, you'll have real-time visibility across all 3 operations, instead of waiting for someone to manually reconcile at end of month." He looked at the folder, then at her. "I didn't ask you to do that." "No." She met his eyes. "But your Q3 tab had someone's grocery list in it. I wasn't going to leave it like that." There was a pause. Then he picked up the folder and opened it, and she watched his eyes track across the first page the way a person does when they're actually reading something, not just looking at it. "Sit down," he said without looking up. She sat. He read for 4 minutes. She counted. Then he turned to the second page and read that too. "You separated the Brampton receivables from the Mississauga stream. They have different risk cycles. Bundling them was hiding exposure. My previous analyst bundled them deliberately. Your previous analyst was making the numbers look cleaner than they were. That's not the same as them being clean." She paused. "Do you want clean-looking numbers or accurate ones?" He looked at her then, fully. It was a different kind of looking than the first meeting. Less like checking arithmetic, more like rereading a sentence that had come out differently than expected. "Accurate," he said. "Then I'll need access to the Brampton accounts directly. Orin's been pulling them for me, but there's a lag and I'm working around a gap I shouldn't have to work around." He picked up his phone, sent a text, set it down. "You'll have it by morning." She stood to leave Voss. She stopped. "You could have done the minimum, enough to satisfy the terms. Most people do." She considered that. "I know, but I don't work that way." She left without waiting for him to respond. The access came through at 7 in the morning. By noon, she'd found the gap she'd suspected. A recurring variance in the Brampton stream that was small enough to miss if you weren't looking for it, significant enough to matter if you were. She printed it out and brought it to Orin, who brought it to Draven, who appeared in her office doorway 40 minutes later. "How long?" he said. "Since at least Q1 last year, based on what I can pull. Possibly longer." She turned her monitor toward him. "Consistent amount, different entry points each time. Whoever's doing it is careful, but not careful enough to vary the timing." He looked at the screen. His jaw was very still. "You're certain?" "I'm certain of what the numbers show. What they mean is your department." He pulled out his phone, made a call that lasted 30 seconds, and then stood in her doorway for a moment looking at nothing in particular. "Good catch," he said. "The same way you'd say it about a calculation, not about a person." She turned back to her screen. "It's my job." What she didn't say was that her hands had been shaking slightly since she'd found it. Not from fear, exactly. From the understanding of what kind of world she'd walked into, and how precisely the edges of it were kept. She was learning something about Cale Draven in these weeks. Not from anything he said. He said very little, and what he said was direct to the point of being almost blunt. She learned it from the way his operations were run. Everything had a logic. Everything had a reason. The violence she'd expected everywhere was mostly absent because it wasn't efficient, and efficiency was the currency this world ran on. She'd expected chaos dressed up in expensive clothes. What she found was more like a very complicated machine. She was good at machines. 6 weeks in, she made a mistake. Not in the numbers. She didn't make mistakes in numbers. She made a mistake in judgment, which was different and in some ways worse. She overheard a conversation she wasn't meant to hear. She was in the copy room. Actual paper still mattered here, for reasons she understood, and 2 men she didn't know came into the hallway just outside and talked for 3 minutes about something that clarified, with uncomfortable precision, exactly what one of the revenue streams she was tracking actually funded. She went back to her desk. She sat very still for a while. Then she opened her model and she looked at the numbers and she made herself think about what she'd agreed to. She'd known what kind of organization this was. She hadn't let herself know exactly, in the way you don't let yourself read the ingredient list when you're already eating, but she'd known. She thought about Desmond and Patrice's kitchen table. The letter. Someone has to settle it. She thought about $47. She thought about what she was actually building here, with her clean columns and her fixed formulas and her restructured model, and whether it mattered that she was doing it well. Cale Draven found her there at 6 in the evening, still sitting with her hands flat on the desk and nothing open on her screen. He came in, looked at her, and pulled up the chair he never sat in. "Say it," he said. She looked at him. "Excuse me, whatever you're working through." "Say it," she met his eyes. "I know what the Brampton stream is for, a beat." "How?" Overheard. "Copy room." "I wasn't looking for it." He looked at her for a long moment. And now I'm sitting here trying to figure out what I am." She said it more plainly than she meant to. "I'm good at this. I know I'm good at this. And what I'm good at is keeping something functional that." She stopped. "I didn't come from nowhere. I know what it costs when things like that get into a neighborhood. I grew up in one." He was quiet. He didn't deny anything which she'd half expected, didn't redirect, didn't rationalize, just sat with it. "The Brampton stream is being restructured," he said finally, "starting next quarter. It's part of why I needed someone who could actually read the books. I need to know what the real exposure looks like when we pull back from it." She looked at him. "That's not something you'd tell most employees." "No." He held her gaze. "It's something I'm telling you." She didn't know what to do with that. She filed it somewhere and didn't look at it directly. "Okay," she said. "Okay." She opened her screen again. He left. 3 months passed the way work passes when you're absorbed in it. In chunks, in problems solved and new ones found, in the rhythm of early mornings and late evenings that stopped feeling like sacrifice and started feeling like hers. She saw Draven 3-4 times a week now, always about work. Specific, direct, no excess. He never asked her anything personal. She never offered. What they had was a working language, precise and efficient, and she understood instinctively that this was how he functioned, and she found she didn't mind it. What she minded slightly was noticing other things. The way he remembered details she'd mentioned in passing, that she took her coffee without sugar, that she worked better with the window cracked, that she had a notation system that looked chaotic but wasn't. He never drew attention to the fact that he'd noticed. He just accommodated, the way you adjust a machine that's been running well. She told herself it was practical. He needed her to function efficiently. That was all it was. She was good at telling herself things. The trouble came in month 4 from a direction she hadn't modeled. She arrived at work to find Orin standing outside her office door, looking like a man who'd swallowed something difficult. "There's someone in the lobby," he said. "She says she's your aunt." Patrice had found her. She didn't know how. She hadn't told anyone. But Patrice had found her, and Patrice was sitting in the lobby in her good coat, looking around at the building, with the expression of someone who's just discovered a relative they underestimated. Tilda went down. Patrice stood up when she saw her. "There you are. We've been worried sick." "No, you haven't." She said it the way she might have said the column doesn't balance, just the fact of it. Patrice's expression shifted through several things. "Tilda, I know it seemed like. Why are you here, Patrice?" A pause. "Desmond is in some trouble, with some people. Beyond just the debt. There's another matter, and he needs some assistance. And we thought perhaps if you spoke to whoever you're working for." There it was. She'd been useful before. She was useful in a new way now. And Desmond and Patrice, who had given her a roof and made sure she understood what it cost every single day, had found her again. "No," Tilda said. "Tilda, the debt was $240,000. Desmond signed it. I'm working it off because I made the choice to, not because I had to. That's done between you and me when the 12 months are up." She kept her voice level. "Whatever else Desmond has gotten himself into, that's not mine." Patrice looked at her, really looked, the way she never quite had before. "You've changed. I haven't changed." She held the door. "I've just stopped being polite about it." She walked Patrice out. She went back upstairs. She sat down and opened her files and worked for 4 hours straight without stopping. because that was what she knew how to do when everything else felt like it was moving. Draven appeared in her doorway at 2 in the afternoon. Orin told me about your visitor. It's handled, I know. He paused. I had her escorted out after you went back up. Politely, she looked up. You didn't have to do that. I know. She looked at him for a moment. What Desmond's gotten himself into, does it involve your people? A beat. Peripherally. Nothing that affects you. Are you going to? Your uncle is going to have an uncomfortable few months. Nothing permanent. He brought it on himself through choices I had no part in. He met her eyes. You are not your Uncle Voss. She absorbed that. Okay, she said for the second time. Okay, he said, for the second time. And something between them, which had been building in the careful space of 4 months of parallel work, shifted almost imperceptibly, like a column that's been slightly off, finally landing on the right figure. Month 8. She'd stopped thinking about the 12 months as a countdown and started thinking about the problems in front of her, which she understood meant something she wasn't ready to name. The Brampton restructure was underway. It was complicated, slow, and required a kind of creative accounting that was entirely legal and had taken her 3 weeks to design. She was proud of it in the private way. She was proud of most things she built. Quietly, without showing it. Draven reviewed it on a Tuesday evening when the office had cleared out. He went through every page. She watched him and didn't pretend not to. This will hold, he said finally. Yes. You built in a buffer I didn't ask for. I build in buffers you don't ask for, because you don't always know what you don't know. That's what I'm here for. He looked up from the pages. The evening light was coming through the west window at a low angle that did something to the room, made it feel smaller, closer, less like a place where transactions happened, and more like a place where 2 people sat with something real between them. The 12 months are up in 4 weeks, he said. She had known this. She'd been knowing it the way you know a storm is coming. Yes, the terms are fulfilled as of the date. The debt is cleared. The severance is ready. I know, he set down the pages. I'd like you to stay. She was quiet for a moment. The window, the harbor in the distance. The hum of the building around them. What does that mean in practical terms? Full salary. Real title. Your own division within the organization. He paused. You'd have oversight over the financial restructure of everything we're moving away from, not just the Brampton stream. It's a 3-year project, minimum. That's a practical offer. Yes. She looked at him. Is that the only kind you make? Something happened in his face, not the ghost of a smile this time. Something more like the actual thing, arrived late and slightly careful. I'm better at practical. I know. She looked down at the pages on his desk. Her work, her numbers, the thing she'd built in a place she'd been brought to against her preference, which had somehow become. She didn't have a better word. Hers. I'll think about it. Take the time you need. She went home that night and she sat in her impersonal apartment that had become, over 8 months, slightly personal. A plant on the windowsill, a mug she'd chosen herself, a notepad on the table with her notation system spread across it, and she thought about what she was actually deciding. She could leave. The debt was clear. She had more in her account than she'd ever had, more than Desmond's kitchen table and Raymond's truck and all the years of someone had ever pointed toward. She could go somewhere else, use what she'd learned, build something on her own terms. She could also stay and build something else entirely. She was good at seeing what a system could become, given the right structure. She'd proven that here. And there was a man on the 14th floor who ran something she didn't entirely endorse, who was nevertheless one of the few people she'd ever met, who seemed to understand that accurate and clean were not the same thing, and who had told her without flinching that she was not her uncle. She sat with it until 1 in the morning. Then she went to sleep. She walked into his office the next morning at 8:45. He was already there, at his desk, coffee going, papers out. He looked up when she came in. She didn't sit down. I have conditions. A beat. Tell me. The Brampton restructure finishes clean the way I've designed it. No shortcuts, no timeline pressure that compromises the structure. Agreed. I have final say on any financial reporting that leaves this building. If I say a number isn't ready, it isn't ready. Agreed. And the project I'm building, the restructure, the new model, I have 2 analysts of my own choosing. People I trust, not people assigned to me. He nodded once. She looked at him. Those are the practical conditions. Yes. He held her gaze. Are there others? The morning light in his office was different from the evening. Sharper, more honest. She'd learned to read his face by now the way she read columns, knowing where the real information was. Not yet, she said. All right. She sat down. 2 months later, she knew what the other conditions were. She didn't state them out loud, because she didn't need to. What existed between them had grown in the space of 10 months of parallel work and precise language, and 2 people who neither of them had expected to find someone like the other. And it had grown without announcements, without ceremony, the way things grow that are built on something structural. He told her things he didn't tell other people. Not secrets exactly, more like the underneath of things, the reasons and the costs and the calculations that had led him to a Tuesday morning at 42 with a machine that worked, and almost nothing else. She understood that he'd been building toward something for a long time, and that what he was building toward was, very specifically, not what he'd started with. She told him things she'd never said out loud. Not the hard things, those took longer, and she gave them slowly, in pieces, the way you rebuild a faulty ledger. But the smaller true things, what she wanted, what she was good at, what she'd been carrying for 17 years that wasn't actually hers to carry. He listened. He didn't try to solve things that weren't problems. He asked occasionally, a single specific question that hit the exact point she'd been circling. She understood, eventually, that this was what caring looked like in someone whose language was efficiency. You paid attention. You remembered the details. You made space. She could work with that. A year and a half after she'd walked into a glass building on the waterfront with $47 and nothing else, Tilda Voss sat at a desk on the 14th floor. Her desk now, in her own office, 3 monitors and a wall of hand-drawn charts, and 2 analysts named Petra and Osi who were the best she'd ever worked with. And she looked at a set of numbers that finally, completely, said what they meant. The organization was different, not cleaned up, not made innocent. She wasn't naive, and she would have laughed at anyone who suggested she was, but restructured, redirected, the worst parts of it gone and the remaining parts running on a logic that she could stand behind and that, crucially, held. Cale Draven knocked on her open door at noon. He did that now instead of appearing without warning, because she'd told him once, quietly, that she liked to know when someone was coming. He'd never forgotten. Lunch, he said. It wasn't a question, but it wasn't quite a command either. It was the language they'd built, which sounded like brevity from the outside, and was actually something more like fluency. She saved her work. She stood. The Q3 projections are ready, she said, picking up her jacket. I'll walk you through them at 2. I'll be there. They left the office together, and she thought, briefly, about Desmond's kitchen table, and the letter and the step she'd sat on with $47 and nowhere to go. She didn't think about it with bitterness. She'd tried that. It was an inefficient way to carry something. She thought about it the way she thought about a corrected ledger. There had been an error. It had been found. It had been fixed. The number at the bottom of the column was different now. It was hers.